There we go. So you got it?
I'm not seeing anything. There it goes.
Okay.
Now I think it's. There, yeah. It's working out. I can see it.
Okay, cool.
Audio, one time,
I'm sorry, what's that, Elvis?
one time you was talking and you had audio on one of them that came back and I think you fixed it.
Okay.
On one of the old.
One of the old recordings. Yeah, I mean, I can check to make sure that it's catching the audio.
It is.
You can hear it? Okay.
I got my Bluetooth in.
Awesome. All right. Well, starting class about a half hour late today, but so the first order of business is that there's a test next week, and the test. I won't be here. I won't be here at all. Like I won't be in Hattiesburg. I won't be here on the coast. So there's a proctor coming in because there's no TA for this course, right?
I technically am, but
okay, but you're in the course. So there's a proctor coming in from one of the offices in the university. So they offered to proctor, and so they're going to come in and they'll be here. The test is going to consist of a two-part test, and I'll post. There'll be a short problem that'll actually be similar to the lab where we just did a few ArcGIS tools, and I'll even let you know which tools you need to follow. So it'll be a short code problem to solve, and then there'll be a written test. Okay. Now the written test, I'll make sure that the proctor knows, but the written test you can utilize your you can utilize the computer if you want to. I mean, it'd probably might even be helpful. Okay, so the written portion of the test will ask some questions, and it's not a super long test. So I'm just going to kind of go through some of the information that you should have for the test, with things that you should know, and then we'll start with today's class. So let me bring up the course so far.
Do we have like a study guide like the last class, or?
I don't have a study guide, but I guess I could probably post one.
That's everything we done covered up to this point.
So and today's one of the reasons why I want to do this first is because today's material will not be on the written portion of the test. Does that make sense? So.
Will it be on like the problem test?
I'm sorry. What's that?
Will it be on the problem part of the test?
No.
Okay.
Today's portion of the class. Today's class won't be on any portion of the test. So. So yeah. So there'll be some basic Python syntax that you'll have to interpret. Okay. So for example, it'll start off really basic. Like it'll have some questions that like make you interpret one line of code, and it might assign a value to a variable. And so you might be asked what the value of that variable is. It might, and in those cases, like that really simple tool, it is true that you could just open Python and type it in, right? Like, yeah. So for those questions, I'm telling you that you could do that, and it should work out just fine. Now it's going to move though from there to like actually, interpreting like what data type something becomes after something's done. Like so, you might have to know. You might have to know that how to get how to understand what the data type is. Okay, so you might review the type function, and you could do it by hand. it'll be pretty obvious. Like you actually wouldn't have to type it in to know if you've spent some time programming it, but you're more than welcome to use the type function to figure out what type it is. Okay, and so that's another set of questions. And then also there'll be some evaluation, like you might be asked what the difference between an assignment operator where I say x is equal to something and I say x equals something. So in which case, like what's the difference between those two? And you can't just stick those in to Python. You really have to understand that one is assigning a value to x and one is asking does x equal whatever the value is. And so that is
false. The last one will be true or false.
yeah, but you might so the most of the test is like a short answer. So if you saw those two and I ask what the difference is, you have to explain what the difference is, and that's not necessarily apparent just by sticking it into Python is what I'm trying to say. But you should know that. And of course, since I'm letting you use the computer, you could go and reread the book and figure it out if you didn't really know the answer. It is possible. Okay. So that's thing. Okay. Then it'll progress from having some kind of one-line interpretations to having some longer interpretations. So you should know like what a function is. So if you see a block of code that represents a function, you should know that's a function, and you should know like what it does, what a function does. You should kind of know like why we would even write a function. Some of the reasons that we write a function would be to consolidate code. I don't have to repeat code a lot of times. I don't have to repeat that same block of code later. Yeah, I guess consolidation / organization is really the same thing. So we've got consolidation, organization, and not having to repeat code are the two main reasons. But yeah,
what is it? Consolidation, not to repeat code, and what?
Consolidation, organization type of concerns. Basically, it allows us to organize our code. Functions do.
So consolidation, organization, and then to not repeat code.
Right. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. All right. And so if there's some code that actually has a function and it returns a value, you'll need to know that the code is never written such that like there's a mistake. Like you might say, well, this is only indented 4 spaces and this next line is indented 5. If I did that, it's a mistake. Like I'm never trying to trick you on the code. Like if I say, what does this code do? The right answer is never going to be, it wouldn't run because you indented 4 spaces and there and not 5 spaces. I'm pretty sure, because I'm just copying and pasting I'm trying to run all the code. I'm running all the code on the test. So I'm not trying to trick you on any of that part. So basically you should be able to copy and paste it back into Python and run it for it to work.
So the test is going to be on PC?
Well, the test is going to be written, so you'll have to actually write the things down. But you're going to be sitting here at the computers, and you can use the PC if you want to, if they'll help you answer the question.
So that's going in the background. Is that the study guide or something on your end?
No, it's just me looking back over what was talked about. Okay.
Okay, well that's not on my screen over here.
This isn't on your screen?
It's still blank.
Sorry. I had to restart it, remember, to get Skype to work, so
yeah.
When I restarted it, I have to remember to reshare it, so thanks for reminding me.
Did you say we are going to have a study guide? You don't have one yet. We will get one, or we just won't have one.
Yeah, I mean, I'll try to make one because I've got to. I got to make. I already wrote the test, but I can write a study guide from the test. And then I'm also going to make like a little video introduction to the code portion of the test. So that'll be like a little 15-minute introduction, and I'll kind of like, talk about how to start the problem. So I'll also post that. So both of those will be posted. Hopefully I can get the study guide and that posted before the end of this week, and then you'll even be able to see it because it'll be up on the course website.
You can almost practice.
Well, you can practice for. I mean, you don't actually. Yeah, and the due date for that won't be that day anyway. That'll be like the end of the week probably.
Oh, the due portion.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Yeah, I'll come up with a good due date for it. I mean, I guess if I get it by the end of this week, then I'll probably not make it due for a week after that. All right. I will be here for the next day. Anybody that's in my next day's class, I'm flying back from a trip. I'll land in Gulfport on Tuesday, but not before class. So I will be here for Wednesday's class, but not Tuesdays.
It would be cool if you did, because then you could come teach here like again, but because you're coming in Gulfport, right?
Yeah, I am coming in Gulfport. You mean like stay the night?
Mm-mm.
Oh,
I'm
but
saying if you got here early.
no, I don't get here till the late evening.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like 10 o'clock or something is when I land. The only flight they could find for me, I have to fly from out west to Chicago to Charlotte to Gulfport.
Oh, that's terrible.
We're driving all day. I mean, flying all day. Yeah.
You're gonna be whipped.
Yeah. Probably. All right. So yeah. So from this page, I guess, focus. There's not really. Yeah, I guess I'll make up this will help when I make up the study sheet, right? But all this stuff is values, data types, variables, statements, operators, expressions. That stuff definitely on the test. There'll be some comments in my code. I won't explicitly ask about them, but this types of programming languages, there isn't really any questions on that. But then there are some questions on functions, which we didn't really cover that week either. And then some of the code analysis will have examples of looping and branching. So you'll have if-then statements, you'll have loops, and you'll have to interpret what's going on. You may be asked, what's the value of this after the first time through the loop? And so, you need to have the skill to either know what it would be by reading the code, or you need to have the skill of being able to copy it in and understanding what the value is after the first time through the loop. So you could put a print statement at the bottom of the loop, look for the first example, something like that. I mean, look for the first printout, things like that. Then another thing that's important that is tested is this concept of things being so I don't know if there's something, I forgot whether there's a question that explicitly talks about mutability and immutability, but if I pass a list into a function, remember, and I change the value of a list inside of a function, that object's value gets changed even outside of the function. Okay, so lists, because they're mutable, can change values inside of a function and then in place. Okay, whereas variables, those get passed, and tuples even, when those get passed, they go inside of a function. You could change the value and they don't appear outside of that function. The value isn't different. So if I pass a variable a into a function, and then I have the choice to relabel it, or I can call it a inside of the function. But if I change the value of a inside the function, it dies in the function. All right, it's gone. As soon as I hit return C, the function ends, or return whatever the output value is. That function ends, and it doesn't change. The value, if I try to reuse a later, it's whatever it was before the function started. However, in Python, if I pass it in as a list and I change any values in the list, it's really because it's an object. Then the value gets changed outside, and if I try to reuse that, I've changed the value inside. Okay. So I don't think that was actually covered in this week's lecture, but that was covered later. In this week's lecture, we did start talking about loops, and you'll have to interpret those, as I already mentioned. And that's really it right there for that one. Yeah, so you should be able to, there'll be some examples on the test. You should be able to reference, should be able to understand what's going on when I reference any type of sequence. So we covered several types of sequences: strings and lists and tuples, which are, a sequence is a data type that's made up of other data. Okay, so a string is made up of characters. Lists are made up of whatever, and lists and tuples are made up of whatever you want them to be made up of. They're just made up of a bunch of other variables. Okay, and then
You said they're a variable. You said sequences are a variable that's just made of other variables.
Well, technically, it's a variable made up of other items. Okay. The other items they don't have their own assigned name. They're just the name of the list, bracket, the number, the list index. And so you should be able to know that, if my list is named my list, bracket 1, bracket, I'm getting the second item out of that list. All right. Yeah. Okay. And then we talked, was it in this week or the next week? What's it doing for? Maybe it was that week.
A call function looks.
Oh yeah.
You got the same brackets like a tuple, right? Parentheses. When you call something, that's in the parentheses.
When you call a function, yeah, when you call a function, you use parentheses. Yep. And when you create a tuple, you use parentheses. But the difference is that you don't give it the name of the function beforehand. You just x is equal to parenthesis 1 comma 2 parenthesis means that you just made x a tuple.
Right.
Okay. X is equal to my function parenthesis x comma y parenthesis means that you're running, you want to call my function and you're giving it x and y as parameters to the function. All right, so this part right here that we talked about this in class. These three things: reduce function, map functions, and filter functions. So you should be able to tell the difference between those. So that's a logical thing that's not code interpretation. Well, it is code interpretation, but you can't just, you could, because the function will be on the test, but you can't just run the function and go, oh, that's a reduce function, because you might be asked, is that a reduce function, a map function, or a filter function? So you need to know the difference between these three, and I'll just review that real quickly. Okay, a reduce function returns a value that takes all the items that are fed into the function and boils them down into one value. So classic examples of that are descriptive statistic functions. So if I have a list of numbers and my function returns the mean or the standard deviation, one number, if it returns out one number and says This is the whatever of that list. That there is a reduce function. It's taking everything, returning the value. So if it was a string and I had a function that returned how many f's were in that string, that's also a reduce function. I'm returning some summary of the input.
Like len would be a reduced function?
Yeah, I mean technically len is counting up how many items are in a function, so it would be an example of a reduced function.
What about like
Mean would be an example of a reduced function. Exactly. Yep. Standard deviation, yeah, it's taking all the items and giving you a summary of those items. A map function takes a sequence, usually a list or a tuple, and it takes every value and adjusts the value by some formula. So in other words, think of it as you having a function and you're running every value in a sequence through it. And so if you did something like, if you had a list of numbers that represented values that were in degrees Celsius, you could have a map function that turned everything from degrees Celsius to degrees Fahrenheit. And you can have two types of map functions. It'll both be map functions. One map function edits the list in place. In other words, you feed it a list and it changes the values in the list. Another type of map function, you feed it a list and it gives you a new list with all of the changed values. But you're making a one-to-one change. In other words, you're taking the values and you're changing them.
So you're talking about it's like a conversion?
It's a conversion, another way to say that. So I know we're in a GIS class, and usually map has a meaning that means, you know, one of those over there. But here we're talking about mapping as in passing through the same function and getting a value to change. So it's conversion. A conversion function would be a map function. So one built-in Python function that's a map function is upper or lower. So it's taking every value in a sequence and it's converting a lowercase value to an uppercase value and returning a new string where everything's uppercase. So that's an example of a map function. Okay.
What are the names of the two types? You said one edits the list and then one makes a whole new list. Or do we need to know?
I didn't make a distinction. I don't know that the.
Just know that two types.
So the book did make a distinction between those two types, where one would have a return value. They just called that a function, and then one that doesn't have a return value, they called it a fruitful function if it had a return value. But I don't make that distinction on the test.
Awesome.
Sometimes in the Python help, it'll say this function edits a list in place. When it says that, what it means is your list is going to change. If it says this function returns a list that is the changed version of your other list in the help, that means that it's the type that creates a new list. Okay, and then finally filter. So reduce, map, filter. Filter functions take a sequence and they feed it into a function and they weed out those items that don't meet a certain criteria. So you could have a function that takes a bunch of numbers and it only returns the positive numbers or only returns the numbers. So you have a new list that's either the same size or smaller in a filter function. Yeah.
Like greater than or less than.
Yeah, greater than or less than a certain value. So those 2, 3, and 4, and I'll put that on this study guide.
Okay, so the filter function takes sequences and weeds out the functions that don't fit what you're looking for?
Weeds out the items that you're not looking for. Yep.
So items.
Yeah, weeds out the items you're not looking. It uses a function to weed out the items that you don't need.
So does it return what you do need or return what you don't need? Because you do to bring out what you don't need or what you do need?
Well, usually it's what you do need.
What you do need.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And then there'll be a few There'll be a few questions that use that have, and they'll be pretty small too, but there'll be 5 or 6 lines of code asking about an ArcGIS problem. So it could be running an ArcGIS command, and you might have to write in English what the result would be. Now for this one, there's no data provided with the lab. I mean with the test. So if you actually wanted to replicate it, you'd have to like pull some data from a previous lab or some data on your own. Other than that, you'd have to just interpret what it's doing. Now you could, like if the test uses a specific tool, and I'm not going to use any advanced tools that you've never heard of. So the tools will be tools that you've used in these classes. If it is a tool that you haven't heard of, you're more than welcome to open up ArcGIS Pro and read about that tool, right? So if you don't know what that tool does, you could look at the help for that. There's always Python written, but you won't be able to actually run these. These will be a little bit different because you want to be able to run those because you want the data to support it. So if you're really curious about it, you'd have to pull those up and run it themselves.
Before the test, can you tell us what kind of data we might need? Just so we can have it ready.
Yeah, I mean,
I would like to do what you're saying.
Okay, so what I would do is make sure that you have a point, line, and polygon layer that overlap, that touch. So your point should be. So think of a study area box, and you have points, lines, and polygons. So you could like go on Maris and download, counties and rivers or roads. Those are line layers, and then download some other points. There's a bunch of points in there. You can download something else and right. In fact, I mean, to be safe, you might want to do. You could always create a polygon layer from any of the point layers, right? Because you could buffer the points, and then all of a sudden they're polygons. So as long as you had one of each, you'd probably be fine. But if there was a situation where you're asked to do a union, then. But the questions are a little bit easier. That they're more like what will the result be from this, but they're not like asking you to reproduce like in my other class where you might have to reproduce the attribute table. It's more like what areas will be covered by.
We're probably have to write code down. Like is this an online test or is it like?
Well, there's 2 portions. So the portion that I'm talking about right now is the written portion, and that you'll have to take during the normal class time period. And that one does not involve actually writing any code, unless you want to type the code into ArcGIS.
Like indent on our paper or anything like that.
You're not writing hardly any. I don't think you're writing any code the way I have it written so far. But even if you do, it would only be like 1 line. Yeah, and you don't have to worry about indenting, but on the portion of the test there will be code, and you have to interpret what the code is doing, and you have the ability to use the computer to do that, and in real life, if you got a job as a GIS professional, and you were working and you were trying to use Python, you would have the ability to go look up something. That's something that I do all the time. Like I usually have a window to the internet open, and then whatever tool I'm using to edit the Python that I'm using, and I'm constantly looking up how do I do this again. Like that's why I'm trying to that's what I'm trying to replicate basically by doing that part of the test. Okay, and like I said, today that was the 4th and the 5th week. there actually isn't going to be, like last week we mostly covered toolboxes, although the test portion will have you write a small little tool, and you'll write a toolbox and you'll send me the script and the toolbox. But the written portion of the test doesn't have any questions about toolboxes at all. Okay. So really the written portion of the test doesn't have anything even from last week either. And then so that was this. That was this week. And then so 6 is where we are. And today, like I said, there's nothing. It used to indent these. I'm gonna figure out why it doesn't do that anymore. This 1, 2, and 3. But anyway, there's nothing from today. Maybe I have to make them smaller. The little eyes to get them to indent. That must be it. Yeah. Okay. So today we'll start. Whoa, the assignment didn't actually show up.
You sure we're on 6 or 5?
We're on 6. The assignment's just one line, so I can retype it. But I wonder why that didn't. Because I know I hit commit changes 3 hours ago. Anyway, I'll take care of retyping the assignment during the break. Okay. Because it's really easy. I mean, it's not like. Anyway, it's really easy for me to do that. All right, so let's start up today. I'm actually going to, just so that this will be 3 different videos, just for organization purposes, I'm going to stop recording that.